some another time. I want to thank Professors Karolewski and Pates for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. So what I will talk to you about today is I'm a weird kind of democratic theorist. So I study democracy not just theoretically, but also empirically. And I believe that empirics, the reality we live in, informs the evolution of theory. And as Professor Pates has said, I am a constructivist. I'm in with one leg, I would say, in the constructivist world, and in the other is a positivist. So I'm not a radical constructivist. I don't believe the world is constructed from over and from nothing. But I also believe that how actors construct political reality really matters. And so one of the meeting points in this is to look at how representation, including the theory of representation, changes in the age of populism. I also believe actually that a perfect comparative case that a lot you will hear in the empirical part will resonate with you, because when I watch some of the proceedings of Bundestag these days, I see a lot of, let's say, unpolitics vibes in there as well. And I think Germany, especially the former East Germany, is a perfect comparative case for the Czech Republic, especially because they both share a legacy of very highly bureaucratized and technocratic form of communism. And I think also it's not random that populism has emerged so strongly in both of these countries after the financial crisis. So I will be very open to also discuss this comparative possibilities. But without much ado, what I want to talk to you today about is to see what is unpolitics, how is it useful for us, and how populists transform representation, how representation is performed. And so the research puzzle, kind of the road to it, is that liberal democracy rests on two principles. On one hand, the balance of the majority rule, and on the other hand, minority rights. So the power of the majority to govern, and the, let's say, right of the minority to be protected. This is not, I'm not talking here about ethnic minorities or religious minorities or LGBTQ plus minorities. This is a political principle. It's about political minority. So those who lose democratic elections are awarded more rights in liberal democratic parliaments in order for the next elections to be again competitive. So when we think about democracy, we cannot think about it as a single election, but as a series of competitive elections. And this balance of majority rule and minority rights is what keeps it afloat. This is also what the populists attack. So populist actors instrumentalize minority protections, and this leads to parliamentary paralysis, but also judicialization of politics. So what is happening today, what we are observing in the populist zeitgeist around the world, is that populism challenges institutions of liberal democracy, not only from outside, but from within. So, and Czech Republic is going to be a good example, as it had populism both in parliament, in opposition, in government, then again in opposition, and now probably soon in government again. So my puzzle is, when do minority rights shift from democracy enhancing So as the necessary principle of keeping the elections competitive to democracy subverting, when do they lead to parliamentary paralysis? So I hope I can proceed. Oh, I have to do it here. So the structure of my presentation, I will focus on the conceptual framing and kind of make you understand how the concept of unpolitics fits into this populist polarized zeitgeist, and then I can show you a little bit about the analysis of speech data and the court rulings. And then in the end, I will just conclude and show you some limitations. So this is a summary of the argument, and I will send along the PowerPoint which I made for you, so you don't have to write all the notes down. So what I kind of try to combine here as a conceptual anchor is the concept of unpolitics. So what I want to, my starting point is that populism has ambivalence towards politics itself. Unpolitics is a normative strategy, and its main aim is to delegitimize mediation. Mediation is the key element of representative democracy, and populists reject exactly that. So what they are seeking is unmediated representation of the authentic will of the people. Polarization turns this, let's say, struggle between populism and anti-populism or non-populism. There is a nuance there, but I won't go into it, maybe perhaps in the discussion. Polarization here serves as the extraordinary conflict, as a conflict about the very nature of politics. So unpolitics I see here as the link between populist style and institutional paralysis. So where does this unpolitics comes? Let's say the author who has coined the concept is British political scientist Paul Taggart. And so the prevailing ideational definition of populism, this people versus elite, overlooks a deep and structural ambivalence towards politics as mediated praxis. So in representative democracy, all politics is mediated. The mediation is the mediation is the elections. So the to make present something that is absent, it only works through mediation. That is the very logic of politics in representative democracy. So here, Taggart introduces unpolitics. It's not anti-politics because it's not the rejection of politics per se. It's also not apathy. It's a strategic denigration of politics as a procedure. It's rejection of conflict settlement. It's the rejection of compromise. It's the rejection of incrementalism. But unpolitics is not a withdrawal. It's an instrumental engagement, performative reluctance, while claiming moral authenticity. Populism contains a normative refusal of pluralist democracy and positions itself as a corrective to a supposedly degenerate political sphere. So in the road to power, so what the populists are trying to do is unpolitics, which in their view would be this unmediated politics in which the populist leader embodies the will of the people. So you don't need election because the leader actually already knows what is necessary. Also, interestingly, the normal rules don't apply to the populist leader because he is above them. This is also something which, of course, doesn't work in democracy, where rule of law actually means that the law should be there for everybody. So the architecture of unpolitics, and here it's necessary to say that while so much, perhaps even too much, have been written about populism, very little has been comparatively done on the moral dimension of populism. Because populism is not only this us versus them, this thin ideology, but it at its very core, which is thin, arguably, as Ben Stanley and Kasmude would say, is also a moral dimension, because it's not only us versus them, but it's about good people against the corrupt elite. So it has a moral normative dimension. So what is unpolitics? It perceives politics as war. It reframes pluralism into existential antagonism. Opponents become enemies, destroying legitimacy condition of democratic competition. You cannot cooperate with somebody. You can cooperate and negotiate with an opponent. You cannot cooperate or negotiate with your enemy. So this is the essential delegitimation of political opponents, turning them into enemies which need to be destroyed, which are not legitimate participants in the political process. Second, politics is religion. So charismatic embodiment, the leader is the charismatic embodiment of the popular will. It's about moral purification and sacralization of leadership, the leader being above the politics, the normal political rules don't apply to him or her. We also have female populist leaders. And this means about the moral purification. Again, you need to purify politics from the corrupt establishment. How you conceptualize the establishment depends on whether you are coming from the perspective of right-wing populism, left-wing populism, or balance populism. So that is where the constructivist features come in. Politics as conspiracy. Thirdly, governance is rendered illegitimate. Institutions are reframed as colluding against people. They should only work. They should only work at the will of the leader, and that's also, you see a lot of attention there to different conspiracy theories. So these are tropes, but they constitute the performative repertoire that authorizes norm breaking, escalates conflict, and delegitimizes procedural democracy. And every representative democracy relies on the procedure, and it always relied a lot on informal rules, on self-restraint of politicians, and that all goes out of the window in the age of populism, because especially when there is a live broadcast from the parliament, but you also very often see populists actually it's doing it for the clicks and doing it for the likes. My favorite was the proposal of Alternative for Germany, that actually it's unfair to citizens that the working meetings of committees in German Bundestag are not broadcast, because German Bundestag, like the Czech parliament, is a working parliament where most of the work is not done in the plenary, but it's done in the committees. And so the AFD was kind of sad that they cannot have more videos. So they wanted to also bring these performative elements into the committees, so far unsuccessfully, but let's see how long. So in politics as performance, as unpolitics, it's the procedural core of representative democracy gets void. Everything becomes performance, and all that matter is how politics is performed. So unpolitics is also a mode of institutional contestation. So it's neither detachment nor anti-system revolution. It's a procedural delegitimation strategy. You could look at it as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So as a candidate, the perhaps future Czech prime minister, we still don't know, Andrej Babiš, said that he sees parliament as a place where there is all talk, no work. And he actually turned it, he and his party turned it exactly into that. And I will show you in the empirical data. So the mission of populists deploying on politics is to delegitimize not just the opposition as enemies, not just the procedures, because all that matters is conflict. You cannot make compromises. You cannot make politics with your enemies. They are not legitimate. You need to destroy them. But actually, delegitimize representative democracy as such. So here, relying also on Robinson, I think the very important point is to look at rejection of mediation. It's not just parliaments, parties, but also courts, but also media are seen as obstacles to authentic representation. So authentically making present what is absent. It converts routine constitutional procedures into evidence of systemic corruption or elite sabotage, or through conspirational thinking that the constitutional court judges are somehow in cahoots with the elites against the true people. It produces hyper engagement. Actors engage aggressively but aim to bypass settlement producing functions of representative institutions. So affect not only rhetoric but also institutional practice, which it reframes constitutional constraints as illegitimate veto points. So actually, it's not only about representative democracy as such, but it's also, let's say, about undermining the constitutional order. It doesn't end with political enemies. The judges are next on the list of the enemies, and us are the journalists, because now the populist leaders don't need or feel they don't need so much the media, because media also serves as a filter, and they can have unfiltered communication through social media to their followers. And why they want to do it without the media? Because of course there would be fact checking, there would be critical questions, and so on. While if you are just making a speech through Facebook Live or on X or wherever else, nobody is holding you accountable. So this is the rejection of accountability mechanism. So enter, I think this is after populism, the next very popular word is polarization. So polarization is an environment that enables unpolitics. So Schedler, who's another Austrian political theorist, conceptualizes polarization as extraordinary conflict. It's not normal politics rivalry, but it's about incompatible moral struggle. So this is what I said. You cannot make compromises with your enemies. So this makes the conflict extraordinary for populists. The political conflict is existential. Polarization is the denormalization of compromise, because for populists, compromise becomes betrayal. It enables populists to reimplement checks and balances as elite obstruction to the authentic will of the people. In the proportional representation system with fragmented party landscape, like the Czech Republic, this creates a centrifugal polarization, structural incentives toward adversarial blocks. This makes it almost in PR systems that rely on actually the cornerstone of proportional representation is compromise. And I think that what if you can take away one thing from this talk today, is that what is the most critical today is this rejection of compromise, the unwillingness to reach compromise as betrayal. The populist, anti-populist cleavage reshapes party system, coalition dynamics, and the performativity of parliamentary competition. So Minority, so I started with the minority protection. So in their recent article in Journal of Democracy, Levitsky and Ziblatt look at counter-majoritarian institution and distinguish two types. The ones I discussed at the beginning that protect democracy, they call them democracy enhancing, and those that paralyze it as democracy subverting. Unpolitics exploits ambiguity. Procedural rights that intend to safeguard pluralism become instrument of institutional sabotage. So, for example, if you have in the rules of procedure of the parliament that the head of the parliamentary party group can call for a coffee break. So there is also some informal norms and culture about that you don't do it before a critical vote, etc. And this all goes out of the window with populists. They weaponize the minority tools, obstructions, filibusters, appeals, and even judicialization to transform governance into procedural warfare. Of course, they do this in opposition because they reject the other lack of representative democracy, the legitimate right of the majority to govern. And so what I want to also show you empirically is that the minority protection shifted in Czech Republic from safeguards to vectors of institutional decay under conditions of centrifugal polarization. What happens is that it established bridge between populist style, minority tactics, and systemic dysfunction. And this all, it's not just happening and randomly, but it's an intentional action to undermine the constitutional system and representative democracy per se. So I don't know if you ever heard what lawfare is, but it's basically the definition would be using legal mechanisms as political weapons. So the Czech populists didn't think in the last term that it's actually enough to deploy all this institutional paralysis, but they also escalated in their eyes, unresolved parliamentary conflict into courts and tried to reframe political disagreement as judicial contestation, as what we just called with Andreas Schedler, the extraordinary politics. What it basically means is it substitutes negotiation with litigation and accelerates the institutional deadlock. They didn't invent it. This has already been used quite a lot in the Brexit as a paradigm case of unpolitical mobilization through courts. Lawfare deepens distrust. Defeat in parliament is reframed as illegitimate. So it said, well, the majority is illegitimate. The fact that they won a vote is also illegitimate. And the defeat in court is then presented as a proof of judicial capture that not only are the politicians of the ruling majority illegitimate and morally corrupt, but so are the judges. So kind of killing two birds with one stone, undermining two institutions instead of just one. So populism rejects, so as a summary, populism rejects compromise and mediation. The leader embodies the people. It has a direct claim to exclusive representation of the will of the people. Opposition is framed as the sole authentic representative of the people, so the populist opposition. So it's not the majority that is illegitimate. The only legitimate voice of the people is the opposition. You may sometimes listen to them. They very much like to use the words as the silent majority. And then it turns out that they get like 4% of the vote. So where was the silent majority then? Minority protections are redefined from democracy enhancing safeguards to democracy subverting weapons. What happens is representation shifts from deliberation to antagonism, and essentially, like ultimately, then what they're seeking is personalized rule by the populist leaders. So I see unpolitics as the bridge between understanding how populism transforms representation. It helps us to capture how populists exploit procedural rules, minority protection, and judicial venues to disable representative institutions while maintaining rhetorical claims to democratic legitimacy. And the Czech case here will show us how parliamentary obstructionism, strategic litigation, moralized rejection of compromise, and elite-level centrifugal polarization actually works. So I asked myself here two questions. So how do populists weaponize minority rights in the Czech parliament, and how is lawfare use to extend unpolitics into the judicial arena? I know you already had a presentation by my colleague Zdenka Mansfeldová, who have looked at the parliament, so I won't go long into it. I can go back to any graph in the discussion if you want. So what I did is I looked at 4 parliamentary terms, so between 2010 and 2025. Starting from the bottom of the graph, you now see, so this is the term before any populist party entered the Czech parliament. The second term, 2013-2017, one populist party in government, one in opposition. In the second, so second from the top, 2017, 2021, again, populist in power. And the third on the top, 2 populist parties in opposition. One Valance populist ANO and one extreme right, which is a party of direct democracy. In this, I distinguish always between opposition and government, so that changes. But what I'm trying to show you is the opposition is red and the government is blue. What you would want to see is, of course, always in parliament, in terms of speaking time, opposition should speak more. But the question is, should opposition speak 250% more? And I think this is what you need to look. Prior to the populism, 2010 to 2013, and comparison with the term that ended 2 weeks ago. So what we are also seeing is the concentration of speaking time. So the numbers are hours in which these leaders, top 5 leaders, spoke during one term. So you're seeing from the term prior to populism, and you always have O is opposition, most to speak the opposition. These are the challengers. Perhaps sometimes you have a prime minister there to kind of respond. Important is also to look at the total. So both populist leaders Tomio Okamura and Andrej Babiš in the recently ended terms spoke more than all top 5 leaders previously. So you're seeing that there is a personalization of obstruction. The populist leaders claim authenticity by exhausting procedural rights. The longest speech of Mr. Okamura took 9 hours, and it was hailed by him towards his followers as a victory of how long he's standing there protecting the adoption of evil and corrupt legislation. So you also see what is happening. So the number of days in session increased by 48%, but the number of night sessions increased by 328%. So what is happening is attrition politics, institutional exhaustion. I want to say that in this term, this also actually let a lot of people resign from politics prior to the 2025 general elections, because especially people with children, both especially women, but also men with young children, just saying like they didn't come to politics for this, for attrition, for institutional exhaustion. And they didn't come to stay, to spend nights in the parliaments when somebody is holding just irrelevant speech about politics. So rules that were intended to enhance oversight of the government by the opposition in this term, and especially with internal competition between two populist parties, turned into democracy subverting delay mechanisms. And what is the effects, you could ask? Well, of course, there is a lot of talk and there is a very little legislation passed. So from working parliament to talking parliament, all talk, no legislation. So the self-fulfilling prophecy of the populist leader Andrej Babiš. He came to parliament, that was a working parliament. He said it wasn't working parliament, it was a talking one. And then he goes and turns it into it, and we have empirical evidence showing that. So to summarize what's happening in parliament, the obstruction is not episodic, it's systemic. The counter-majoritarian tools are hollowed into instruments of attrition. The most powerful person in the Czech parliament became the one who holds the keys to one of the two showers which exist in the whole building, because they are like 36 straight hours of meetings. Basically, what's happening is the members of parliament are taking turns sleeping in sleeping bags on the floor of their parliaments, because of course the opposition is also waiting and counting the numbers, so vote can come any time, and just normal sane people don't want to do it. So, as if it was not enough, but still, with all this obstruction, some legislation gets passed. And the innovation by ANO in the 2021 to 2025 term was that they took the legislation to the Constitutional Court to see it as illegitimate. And as you see, they basically succeeded only partially in one case. I can go into it, but never on the procedural ground. So every litigation, even if they lost, they again used the same argument that any constraint on parliamentary speech, any limitation on the length of parliamentary speech deems any law passed as unconstitutional, because of course the aim of the opposition is no law passed by the majority. What they delegitimize is the right of the majority to rule. It's also interesting, the fifth case, which is here Babiš versus Kalousek. It's interesting. It's not about legislation. It's about indemnity. So what are the limits of the speech in parliament? You know that the parliamentary speech is especially protected speech. However, and this was very interesting, in this case, this was when Mr. Babiš was in opposition, and he accused then Minister of Finance, Mr. Kalousek, of being a murderer on the parliamentary floor. And then it went for years through all the courts. Most of the courts said, well, parliamentary speech is especially protected speech, until it reached the Constitutional Court, which made the final verdict, and it said, yes, parliamentary speech is especially protected speech, but there is an ultimate limit to free speech, and that is lies. So you cannot lie. So Mr. Kalousek didn't murder anybody. No evidence was presented. So he cannot be called murderer. You cannot slander your political opposition by lying. You can exaggerate a lot of things. You have a lot of, let's say, a lot of free reign on what you can do, but lies are not one of them. So to synthesize the lawfare aspect of it, so high failure rate, but symbolic victories matter. So what the populists kind of were able to spin this into reinforcing the narrative, look, the parliament is corrupt and only populists defend the people, and also every loss at the constitutional court was presented as the court being corrupt as well, which sent shockwaves through the community, because that really becomes dangerous. So what is the risk? It's the delegitimation of both of the arenas, and judiciary is drawn into partisan theater. So what for populists, basically, to answer my question, how did populism reframe representation? It reframed representation as performative obstruction. Parliamentary floor becomes the stage of a spectacle, not a forum of deliberation. Leaders monopolize debates. So you also see personalization of representation. So it's not people, voters being represented by members of parliament, they are represented by the populist leaders. Obstruction is recast as defense of the people against the corrupt elite. And as the proceedings are televised, citizens mostly see conflict, not deliberation. There is no broadcast from the parliamentary committees. So actually, a lot of double-faced politics, because in committees, these populist leaders actually are able to reach compromise. So this is all like fake performativeness for the cameras. Political defeats are reframed as constitutional violations. So they are reframed as violations of the constitutional rules. And litigation then portrays again populists as the guardians of the people's will against an illegitimate majority and against the corrupt judges. So representation moves both from parliamentary decision-making area to the judicial arena, draws it into conflict, and also, of course, prolongs conflict. So working parliament turns into talking, spectacle over substance, from deliberation to antagonism, when compromise is betrayal, from policy making to lawfare, politics shifted to the courts, and the overall effect is hollowing out of representative democracy, where procedures that were meant to protect pluralism are exploited to paralyze majority rule and to create this self-fulfilling prophecy that representative democracy is corrupt, and it is corrupt not financially but also morally, and that the only way to represent the will of the people is by the populist leaders. So what's the conclusions and implications? So the Czech case shows how rules that are designed for pluralism can become tools of paralysis. Unpolitics is not absence of politics, but it's distortion of mediated politics into performance. It's about spectacle. And I think what's contribution here is to kind of theorize institutional unpolitics, and also adding the dimension of not just of populist in parliament, but also the dimension of lawfare. The implications are that resilience depends not only on formal reform, but on reviving norms of forbearance and mutual toleration. We cannot, let's say, get out of this without the populists giving up, and they won't, because it's working. The spectacle is working, and this is where we are. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.